Hi everyone, this is Chrism, and I'd like to welcome you to this conversation about your Kundalini awakening experiences. In this conversation, I'd like to discuss with you an extremely important subject, and that's the subject of Kundalini Devotion. Some of you will never be able to commit yourself to devotion because of your political leanings or your spiritual leanings or your religious understandings, and you won't be able to give the devotion the way your grace wants you to give devotion. Sometimes we give our devotion to God in the form of a cross, or of a person meditating, or of a concept. Uh, we'll worship a geometric form like a cube, or a triangle, or a circle. Uh, we'll worship an animal, but very, very rarely, and I mean rarely in the sense of truth, will we worship another human being devotionally. And sometimes your grace will want you to do that, and it's difficult. And you know, it's a big leap forward for people, but it's also a huge trigger for most of the population, including the Kundalini population. We're raised not to give ourselves to some cult leader, or some presidential nominee, or some religious. We're raised in our societies, our multiple societies, not to do this. It's better to just give it to Jesus, or to Buddha, or to someone who is not alive. Someone who is not breathing the air that we breathe, or living in the sun that we live under. I mean, dead teachers seem to be the safest place to give your devotion, because it won't be taken advantage of. A dead teacher's not going to go, oh, well, give me all your money, or whatever it is that some of these flesh teachers in the past have done. And I get it. But sometimes your Kundalini is going to push you towards giving devotion to a flesh person, whether they know it or not. You see, uh, not always do you have to be in acknowledgement, or do you have to know the person that the Kundalini wants you to give devotion to. It's a touchy subject here. I've received devotion from many different people over and over, but I haven't received it. It's the grace within me that has received it. And people have a hard time making that link. They see, because Kundalini is so meshed into the individual, that another person without that reference point, without that blending of grace and the flesh, if they don't have that blending of the grace and the flesh themselves, well, it can be very difficult to see it or feel it in another person. They don't have that reference point, and yet they will still be compelled to do this, and it'll be until that compelling is answered, it will be a loose end in their equation. They'll struggle to know why they're not feeling like complete. They'll wonder why something's not there that needs to be there, and it's not there, and where is it? And it's in devotion, and it's overcoming the fear of corruption that the ego is creating a blockage to, instead of overcoming it, the ego embraces it. It's really hard to do this, and yet it's not. I mean, I found it fairly easy. But maybe that's just me. Um, the Hindu culture is more supportive of this type of a thing, and yet, even they get burned. When they give to. Well, no, actually, I'm being corrected right now. No, they do not get burned because it is not the teacher that is being devoted to. It is the grace within the teacher, the grace within that spiritual person that is being that is receiving the devotion. It's not the human body. It's not the consciousness of that person that is receiving the devotion. It's like early on when I first started teaching, I would be introduced into some Hindu communities in Southern California. And one of the first things they did was they bent down to touch my foot. And I have to tell you, I was quite ignorant about Hindu culture. I grew up in Northern California in a farming community. Nobody's touching your feet, okay, unless you're getting kicked. So anyway, they bent down and touched my feet, and I thought my shoe was untied. Okay, so I'd bend down there with them. Say, what are you doing? So they know, and they understand that a human being can carry grace. And all human beings have the potential to carry that grace, but not all have the karma to do it at the same time. That's why this idea of these mass awakenings is not a probability. Because everybody has their different karma, and grace and Kundalini activation and awakening are tied directly to specific levels of karmic redemption. So what I'm saying by saying all this is that give devotion to a flesh teacher if your Kundalini is guiding you to. Do it. The flesh teacher doesn't have to know. Now, if you know the flesh teacher, if you've worked with the flesh teacher before, well, that's a different deal. Then you're being given an opportunity to go even further into it. And remember, it is not the flesh teacher that is receiving this. It is the grace that the flesh teacher carries that is receiving it. When people would bend down to touch my foot, I was about as neutral about it as you could be. I was a little bit surprised, wondered if what was wrong with my foot or my shoe. But that's because I didn't know. It was not something that my grace told me about. She tells me a lot. But, at that time, she didn't tell me that people were going to bend down and touch my feet. And come away from that touch with a great level of excitement. I didn't know about these things at the time. That was 14 years ago. So give the devotion. And yes, there's plenty of fake gurus out there, teachers out there who make a big show about knowing this or being holier than thou, right? They make a big show of it. They charge a lot of money. And, it's unfortunate, and yet if they're true, if they're a true person, then it's not unfortunate. Then it's a good thing. And somebody's posting on here, and I don't quite know how to get to them. So my apologies if I'm not answering your question here. I'm scrolling down to try to find you, and Christian says, I'm trying to understand it. I've walked to the beat of my own path for my whole existence. I'm intrigued by this teaching. Yeah, I totally get you. I totally get you. And it goes to what I was saying at the beginning, in our society, we are trained not to give. We are trained not to give our devotion to anyone but a dead teacher or an object or like say an animal or a rock or, the moon, the sun, nothing that even resembles a human being. And yet, And yet, it is the human that carries the Kundalini grace. It is the human being that carries this. And different people have different levels of grace in different frequencies. And within these frequencies, your Kundalini will compel you to reach into and partake of the radiance that a human teacher or someone who has the Kundalini, don't even call him a teacher, don't call him a guru. I mean, these are just labels that another person is carrying, and to lay down at their feet and to give themselves in every possible way. Seriously. I've done this. A tremendous level of bliss is formed. Tremendous level of bliss is formed in the individual who is giving the devotion. You see what I'm saying? It's like, when you give devotion in these ways, you receive such strong levels of bliss. Because one, you're overcoming the egotistic fear of being taken advantage of. You're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You're allowing yourself to be open to grace. Okay, number one. Number two, when you give yourself to grace and you remove those blockages, you're allowing yourself to receive the grace that your Kundalini wants you to receive. And it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. But you must do it. You must overcome that. This is really an important subject and that people need to listen to. Some of you, you can say, yeah, I give devotion, I do. I say my mantra and I say my prayers and I get down on my hands and knees and I do anything that I'm told to do within a Kundalini context and so, but there's more. There's more intensity you can bring to it. There's more truth that you can bring to it. There is more love that you can bring to it. There is more of a complete and total dependency like a child to a parent that you can bring to it. And remember, once again, you're giving that to the grace of the individual, not the individual themselves. You have to understand that. This is a very important subject, and I'll ask people to kind of, in their comments, to stick to this subject. This isn't about, other things. This is about devotion. And be devotional in your life. Don't be afraid to allow the Kundalini to compel your levels of devotion to exist in this world. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't allow yourself to fall away from such practices because they bring up levels of purification and detoxification that your ego maybe isn't comfortable with. Don't be afraid to harvest the fruit of the devotion within yourself. Realize that part of the reason for the devotion is to loosen up these areas of fear, these areas of a fear of being taken advantage of, a fear of being vulnerable. These areas of fear no longer serve you, and the devotion is helping that to go away. So, if you feel compelled to give your devotion, then just start doing it. If it's a living teacher, a living person, then give your devotion to the grace within that teacher. And remember, if the teacher is promoting violence, if the teacher is promoting greed, if the teacher is wavering away from the noble qualities, then you probably don't want to give them devotion. Ask your Kundalini, just the way you would ask your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister, just like, hey, my Kundalini is this person worthy of devotion? And you'll get a yes or a no with it. Okay. So there you have it, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching.